I learned the hard way that being invisible doesn't mean you're safe. It just means no one is looking when things start to go wrong. The night it almost happened, the rain hadn't stopped for hours, a steady whisper against the clinic windows that made everything feel distant, like the world was happening somewhere else, and I'd been left behind. My shift had ended at 10 p.m., but I stayed longer, reorganizing files that didn't really need organizing, just to delay stepping out into the cold parking lot where the lights flickered like they were deciding whether I was worth illuminating. I told myself I was tired, that the heaviness in my chest was just another 12-hour shift, another day of being overlooked, another reminder that people only noticed you when you made a mistake. I grabbed my keys, the metal cold against my palm, and stepped outside, the air sharp, the smell of wet asphalt rising around me as my sneakers splashed through shallow puddles. Halfway to my car, I felt it, that subtle shift, like the world tilting half an inch off balance. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like the absence of one, the quiet, stretching too thin. I slowed, my breath catching, my eyes scanning the empty rows of cars, telling myself I was imagining things, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me again. That's when I saw him, not close, not moving, just there, leaning against a black car that looked too expensive for this part of town, his silhouette sharp under the flickering light. He wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't pacing, wasn't doing anything people usually do when they're waiting. He was watching, and somehow, I knew he wasn't watching the parking lot. He was watching me. I looked away quickly, my pulse picking up, telling myself not to overreact. That men looked at women all the time, and it didn't mean anything. That I was being dramatic, that I needed to just get in my car and go home. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once, the sound louder than it should have been, echoing in the empty space. When I bent down to pick them up, I felt it again, that shift, stronger this time, like a warning. I didn't understand. And then his voice, low, controlled, cutting clean. Through the night, don't. I froze, my fingers hovering inches from the keys, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out the rain. I turned slowly, every instinct telling me to run, but my legs didn't move. He had already stepped closer, not fast, not threatening, just certain, like he had all the time in the world. Up close, he didn't look angry or rushed, just focused, his eyes scanning everything except my face, like he was piecing together something I couldn't see. Step back, he said, quieter now, and something in his tone made it impossible to argue. I took a small step back without thinking, my mind racing to catch up, to understand why a stranger was giving me instructions like he had the right. He moved past me then, his hand reaching toward my car door, not touching it, just hovering for a second before he exhaled, almost imperceptibly. You didn't notice it, he murmured, more to himself than to me, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. I swallowed, my voice barely steady. Notice. What? For the first time, his eyes met mine, dark and unreadable, and whatever he saw there seemed to confirm something because his expression didn't change, not even a flicker. Exactly, he said, and in that single word, I realized something that made my stomach drop. He had been watching me long before I ever noticed him, and whatever he saw tonight, it was something no one else had cared enough to see. My mind tried to catch up with what he had just said, but it felt like chasing something already gone, something I should have seen but did not, and now could not unsee. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how quiet the parking lot had become, how the rain seemed to press closer, like it was listening too. I do not understand, I said, my voice smaller than I intended, and he tilted his head slightly, studying me in a way that made me feel transparent, like every thought I had was written somewhere he could read. That is the problem, he replied, calm, not unkind, but not gentle either, just certain. He stepped back then, creating space, but not distance, his presence still filling the air around me like something heavy and controlled. Get in your car, he added, and for a second I almost laughed, because the idea of taking orders from a stranger should have felt ridiculous, but it did not when everything in me was still humming with that quiet warning I could not explain. You cannot just tell me what to do, I said, even as my fingers tightened around my keys again, even as my feet shifted half a step toward the driver's side door. His gaze flickered to the far end of the lot, so quick I almost missed it, and that was when the driver's seat, the familiar smell of my car grounding me just enough to breathe. I looked up at him one more time, my hand trembling slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. "Are you coming with me?" I asked before I could stop myself, and something like the faintest shadow of a smile touched his lips, gone almost before it appeared. "No," he said quietly. "I am going to make sure they do not follow." And for the first time since I had walked into that parking lot, I felt something shift. Inside me, not fear, not exactly, something closer to being seen, to being pulled out of a place I did not even know I was standing in. I started the engine, the sound louder than usual, and as I pulled away, my eyes caught him in the rearview mirror, standing there in the rain, still, watchful, like the night itself had chosen a side, and for reasons I could not explain, it had chosen mine. I did not stop driving until the city changed around me, until the empty streets gave way to late-night traffic and glowing storefronts, until there were enough headlights and movement to convince myself I was no longer alone. My hands stayed tight on the steering wheel the entire time, my shoulders stiff, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror more often than the road ahead, searching for something I still could not define. Every pair of headlights felt too close, every shadow too long, and his words kept replaying in my head, steady and certain. "Someone else noticed you tonight." I told myself it did not make sense, that I was overreacting, that strangers did not just appear out of nowhere and predict danger like that. But the weight in my chest refused to lift. I pulled into a gas station on the corner of Maple and 8th, the kind that stayed open all night, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A couple of cars parked near the pumps, a man inside paying at the counter, normal, ordinary, safe. I parked under the brightest light I could find and turned off the engine, the sudden silence pressing in around me as the rain softened to a steady tap against the windshield. For a moment, I just sat there, staring straight ahead, trying to slow my breathing, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that nothing had actually happened. But then I noticed it, something small, something I would have ignored any other night. A dark sedan parked across the street, engine running, lights off. My stomach tightened immediately, my fingers curling against the steering wheel as I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look without making it obvious. The car did not move, did not signal, did not do anything except sit there, quiet and still in a way that felt too intentional. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone was just waiting. Maybe I was letting fear turn ordinary things into something else. But the longer I looked, the more that same feeling from the parking lot crept back in. That subtle shift, that sense of being seen without understanding how. I reached for my phone, hesitating before unlocking it, unsure who I would even call, what I would even say, when a sudden flash of headlights behind me made me flinch. Another car pulling into the station. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong, but my nerves were already stretched thin, every sound amplified, every movement too sharp. I glanced back at the sedan across the street, my pulse picking up again, and for a split second I thought I saw a movement inside, a shadow shifting, just enough to make my breath catch. I looked away quickly, my heart racing now, the calm I had tried to build cracking under the pressure of something I could not ignore anymore. He had said do not stop, and I had stopped. Anyway, the realization hit me hard, sudden and unwelcome, and before I could second-guess it, I started the engine again, my hands moving faster this time, instinct taking over where logic had failed. As I pulled out of the station, I risked one more glance in the mirror, and this time the sedan's headlights flicked on, slow, deliberate, like a decision had just been made. A cold wave rushed through me, my grip tightening as I pressed the accelerator just a little more, my mind scrambling for what to do next, where to go, who to trust, and for the first time since I had left that parking lot, I wished I had listened without question, because somewhere behind me, whether I understood it or not, something had decided I was worth following, and I was no longer sure I could outrun being seen. I should have turned onto a main road, should have headed straight for somewhere crowded and bright, but panic does not follow directions. It loops and spirals, and makes you second-guess even the obvious. The sedan stayed 2 car lengths behind me, not rushing, not falling back, just there, steady in a way that made my chest tighten with every glance in the mirror. I tried to tell myself it could still be coincidence, that maybe they were just going the same way, that not every shadow meant danger, but the rhythm of it felt wrong, too precise, like they were matching me on purpose. I switched lanes suddenly, signaling late, watching carefully, and they followed, not immediately, but just enough to confirm what I already felt. My fingers tightened around the wheel, my breathing shallow now. The soft hum of the engine suddenly too loud in the quiet car. Think, I told myself, think, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him, to the way he had stood there in the rain, calm, certain, like he had already seen this moment before it happened. He told me not to stop, and I had stopped anyway. Regret settled heavy in my chest, sharp and immediate. The street ahead split into two directions, one leading deeper into residential blocks, the other toward the highway, brighter, faster, more people, more exits, more chances. I chose the highway, pressing the accelerator a little harder as the road opened up in front of me, the rain thinning into a mist that streaked across the windshield. Merging into traffic felt like stepping into noise after silence, headlights rushing past, engines humming. A sense of movement that should have made me feel safer, but the sedan was still there, slipping in behind me like it belonged. I checked my mirrors again and again, my pulse refusing to settle, every second stretching longer than it should. A mile marker passed, then another, and I realized something that made my stomach drop even further. They were not trying to catch up, not trying to overtake me. They were staying exactly where they wanted to be, watching, waiting. My phone sat in the cup holder, dark and silent, and for a moment I considered calling someone, anyone, but the idea of explaining this, of sounding paranoid, made my hand hesitate. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I drove faster, not recklessly, but enough to create distance, enough to feel like I was doing something. The city lights blurred slightly at the edges as my focus narrowed, every sense tuned to the road, to the mirrors, to the presence behind me that refused to disappear. And then, just as suddenly as the panic had peaked, something changed. A black car moved into my lane ahead of me, smooth and controlled, not cutting me off, just appearing like it had always been there. For a second, I barely registered it, my attention still locked on the sedan behind me, until the distance between us began to shift, subtly at first, then more clearly. The sedan slowed, not abruptly, just enough to break the pattern, just enough to fall back. I blinked, confused, my grip tightening as I watched it drift further behind, the tension in my chest twisting into something uncertain. The car ahead of me did not accelerate, did not signal, just stayed steady, perfectly placed between me and whatever had been following. And I knew, without needing to see his face, without needing confirmation, that this was not coincidence. My breath caught as realization settled in, quiet but undeniable. He had not let me leave alone, not really, and somehow, without a word, without asking, he had found me. Again before I even knew I needed him. I did not know whether to feel relief or fear, because the car ahead of me was not just blocking the sedan, it was controlling the space between us, steady and deliberate, like every inch of distance had already been calculated. My breathing slowed slightly, but my hands still refused to relax, fingers locked around the steering wheel, as if letting go would somehow break whatever fragile protection had just formed. The sedan behind us stayed back now, no longer closing the gap, its headlights smaller in the mirror, less immediate but not gone, never fully gone. I swallowed, my thoughts racing, trying to understand how he had found me again, how he had known exactly where I would be, exactly when to appear. Coincidence did not feel like the right word anymore. The highway stretched ahead in long, glowing lines of white and red, the rain finally easing into nothing more than a faint shimmer on the asphalt. But the tension in my chest refused to follow the weather. It stayed, coiled tight, waiting. The black car in front of me shifted lanes without warning, smooth and precise. And for a split second I panicked, thinking it was leaving, that whatever shield it had created was about to disappear. But then I saw it, the subtle adjustment, the way it slowed just enough for me to fall in directly behind it, the way it positioned itself again between me and the sedan as traffic rearranged around us. It was not random, not reactive, it was intentional. He was guiding me. The realization settled slowly, heavy but grounding, like stepping onto solid ground after drifting too far out. I followed without questioning this time, matching the speed, the distance, the rhythm he set, my earlier resistance fading into something quieter, something closer to trust. An exit sign appeared ahead, green and reflective, and the car in front signaled. The first clear instruction, blinking steady in the dark. I hesitated for half a second, my instincts still clinging to doubt, but then I saw the sedan behind us hesitate too. Just for a moment, and that was enough. I followed the signal, easing into the exit lane, my heart picking up again as the highway noise faded and the road curved away from the main traffic. The black car slowed as we descended, the space around us opening into quieter streets lined with closed shops and dim streetlights, the kind of place that felt empty but not exposed. When we reached the bottom of the ramp, the car ahead pulled to the side, not abruptly, just enough to create a pause, a decision point. I slowed too, my pulse loud in my ears, my mind running through a dozen possibilities at once, none of them clear. For a moment I considered driving past, pretending none of this had happened, but something in me knew that would be a mistake, that whatever had started tonight was not something I could simply leave behind. I pulled over a few feet behind the car, the engine idling softly, the quiet pressing in again, different this time, heavier but not as empty. The driver's door of the car ahead opened, slow, controlled, and even before he stepped out, I knew it was him. The same stillness, the same presence that seemed to shape the air around him. He closed the door behind him and walked toward my car, unhurried, like nothing about this situation required urgency, like he had already solved the part one was. Still trying to understand, I lowered my window halfway, my voice unsteady but stronger than before. "You followed me," I said, and he stopped just short of the door, his gaze meeting mine with that same unreadable calm. "No," he replied quietly. I stayed where I needed to be. And something in the way he said it made the difference clear. He had not been chasing me. He had been anticipating everything, every turn, every mistake, every moment I did not see what was coming. I hesitated, searching for the right question, the one that would make sense of all of this. But all that came out was the truth I could not ignore anymore. They are still out there, are they not? And for the first time, his eyes softened just slightly, not with comfort, but with certainty. "Yes," he said, "but they are not as close as they were." And the way he looked at me then made one thing painfully clear. Distance did not mean safety. Not yet. Not until he decided it was. The silence between us stretched just long enough to make me aware of everything I did not understand. The quiet street, the soft ticking of my engine, the faint glow of a streetlight reflecting off the hood of his car, and the way he stood there like none of it could touch him. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. But the question that had been building since the parking lot finally pushed through. "Why me?" I asked, my voice quieter now, not panicked, just searching. His gaze did not shift, not even slightly, as if the answer had already been decided long before I asked it. "Because you did not see it," he said, and for a second I almost felt frustration rise again, that same confusion twisting in my chest. But before I could respond, he continued, his tone measured, precise, "And neither did anyone else around you." I swallowed, my fingers loosening slightly on the edge of the steering wheel. "That does not explain why someone would follow me," I said, and this time he stepped a little closer, not enough to invade my space, just enough to lower his voice without raising it. "You are predictable," he said simply, and the word hit harder than I expected, not as an insult, but as a realization, something uncomfortably true. I frowned, my mind trying to process it. "I go to work. I go home. I do not bother anyone," I said, more defensive than I intended, and he nodded once, like that was exactly the point. "Routine creates patterns," he replied. "Patterns can be studied, repeated, anticipated." His eyes flicked briefly down the street, then back to me. "Always aware, always calculating. Tonight, something in your pattern changed," he added, and I felt that same chill again, sharp and immediate. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "You stayed late," he said, and my breath caught because he was right. "You hesitated before leaving. You chose a different pace, and that drew attention." I stared at him, the weight of his words settling slowly, uncomfortably, because none of it sounded dramatic, none of it sounded like something that should matter, and yet here I was, sitting on a quiet street with a stranger who seemed to know my life better than I did. "That is not enough," I whispered, more to myself than to him, and for the first time, Something in his expression shifted, not doubt, but a faint trace of something heavier, something that carried more than just observation. "It is when someone is already looking for an opening," he said, and the air around us seemed to still again, like the night was holding its breath. I shook my head slightly, trying to ground myself. "And you just happened to notice all of this?" I asked, and this time, he did not answer right away. Instead, he studied me for a moment longer, like he was deciding how much to say, how much I needed to hear. "I do not miss details," he said finally, calm, certain, and there was something in the way he said it that made it clear this was not a skill he turned on and off. It was who he was. I leaned back slightly in my seat, the tension in my shoulders shifting into something else, something less sharp, more focused. "So what happens now?" I asked, because that was the part that mattered, the part one could not ignore anymore. He straightened slightly, his posture unchanged but somehow more final, like a decision had already been made. "Now," he said, his voice steady, "you do not go back to your routine." And my heart skipped, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what that meant. "You stay where I can see you," he added, and the words settled between us, quiet but absolute. Not a suggestion, not a command exactly. Something else, something that felt like both protection and control at the same time. I opened my mouth to argue, to question, to push back against the idea that my life could just shift like that. But the memory of the sedan, of the headlights in my mirror, of the way something had chosen me without my permission, stopped me. I looked at him again, really looked this time, at the calm certainty in his eyes, at the way nothing about him seemed rushed or uncertain, and for the first time since this night began, I understood something I had been trying to avoid. He was not reacting to what had happened. He was already ahead of it, and whether I liked it or not, he had stepped into my life not as a stranger passing through, but as someone who had already decided he was not leaving. The words settled into me slower than I expected, not like a shock, but like something heavy finding its place, something I could not ignore once I understood it. "Stay where I can see you." He had said it like it was simple, like it did not require me to rethink everything I thought I controlled. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my eyes dropping briefly to my hands before lifting back to him. "You are asking me to change my life," I said, and even to my own ears it sounded smaller than it should have, like I already knew the answer. "I am telling you that your life already changed," he replied, just as steady, just as certain, and there was no argument in his tone, no pressure, just a fact placed between us. I looked away for a second, my gaze drifting down the empty street, the quiet storefronts, the dim lights that suddenly felt less comforting than before, like they were only hiding how much I had missed until now. Routine, patterns, predictable, the words echoed in my mind, reshaping everything I thought was normal into something fragile, something exposed. "And if I say no?" I asked, turning back to him, testing the edges of this new reality, needing to know if I still had a choice. He did not hesitate, not even for a second. "Then I keep watching anyway," he said, and something in my chest tightened. Not fear exactly, something more complicated, something that felt like both resistance and relief colliding at the same time. I frowned slightly, trying to understand him. "That does not make sense," I said, and he tilted his head, just enough to study me again, like he was measuring how much I was ready to accept. "It does," he said quietly. "You just are not used to someone noticing what matters." The words landed deeper than I expected, because they were not about danger anymore, not entirely. They were about something else, something personal, something I had spent years pretending did not bother me. I swallowed, my voice softer now. "You do not even know me," I said, and this time, something shifted in his expression. Not emotion, but something closer to intent. "I know enough," he replied. "I know how you move, how you hesitate, how you ignore the small things that could cost you." His gaze held mine, unblinking. "And I know you would not have made it through tonight if I had not been there." I wanted to argue, to push back, to say he was wrong, but the image of the sedan, of the headlights falling back only when he appeared, stopped the words before they could form. Silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, less uncertain, more like a space waiting to be filled with a decision. I leaned back slightly, my grip on the wheel finally loosening, my thoughts settling into something clearer, something more grounded. "So what are you expecting?" I asked, because that was the part one needed to understand, the part that would define everything after this moment. He straightened just slightly, his presence still calm but unmistakably firm. "For now," he said, "you follow my lead." And there it was again, that balance between protection and control, between safety and something I could not fully name yet. I let the words sit for a second, testing how they felt, testing whether I could accept them. And to my own surprise, the resistance I expected did not come as strongly as before. Instead, there was something else, something quieter, something that had been building since the moment he told me not to pick up my keys. I nodded once, small but deliberate, and his gaze shifted just slightly. Not approval, not satisfaction, just acknowledgement, like he had expected this outcome all along. "Good," he said, and stepped back toward his car, already moving forward, already thinking. "Beyond this moment, then do not lose sight of me," he added. And as he turned away, the quiet certainty of his words stayed with me, heavier than anything else that had happened tonight, because for the first time, I was not just reacting to what I could not see. I was choosing to trust the one person who had seen everything before I did. The engine of his car came to life first, low and controlled, like everything about him. And for a brief second, I just sat there, watching the red glow of his taillights reflect against the damp pavement, realizing that the moment I followed him, there was no going back to what this night had been before. I started my car again, my hands steadier now, not because I felt safe, but because I had chosen something, and that choice anchored me in a way fear alone never could. He pulled away without hesitation, turning onto the next street with smooth precision, and I followed, keeping the distance he had set earlier, not too close, not too far, matching his pace like I had already learned the rhythm without being taught. The streets we moved through were quieter now, the city settling into that late hour where everything felt suspended, storefronts dark, traffic lights cycling through empty intersections, the world reduced to just motion and silence. I kept my eyes on his car, on the way it moved, deliberate and controlled, never rushed, never uncertain, like he was not just driving, but navigating something invisible beneath the surface. After a few turns, we reached a broader avenue, brighter, lined with open businesses and late-night diners. The kind of place where people still existed, where the world felt awake enough to notice if something was wrong. He slowed slightly, just enough for me to close the gap, then shifted lanes, positioning himself in a way that felt intentional again, always aware of what was behind, what was ahead, what could change. I glanced at my mirror instinctively, the habit now impossible to ignore, and my breath caught when I saw it. The sedan again, farther back this time, almost blending into the normal flow of traffic, but still there, still present, like a question that refused to be answered. My grip tightened, but I did not panic the way I had before, because now I understood something I had not earlier. I was not alone in seeing it anymore. He knew. The realization settled deeper, steadier, like a line drawn between what I could handle and what I could not. We moved through another intersection, the light turning green just as we approached, and for a moment everything felt almost normal, like any other drive home, except for the awareness humming beneath every second. Then, without warning, his brake lights flickered briefly, a subtle signal, and he shifted lanes again, guiding the space between us and the traffic behind in a way that felt less like driving and more like strategy. I followed without thinking, my earlier hesitation gone, replaced by a quiet trust that felt strange but undeniable. The sedan tried to adjust too. I could see it in the mirror, the slight movement, the attempt to maintain distance without drawing attention, but something about the way he positioned us made it harder, more exposed, like he was forcing them to choose between staying hidden or staying close. The road opened up ahead, leading toward a well-lit intersection where several streets converged, more cars, more movement, more eyes. He slowed just enough again, controlling the pace, and I realized what he was doing, not escaping, not running, but shifting the environment, changing the conditions, making it harder for anything to remain unnoticed. As we approached the intersection, the sedan fell further back, blending into the line of cars behind, no longer distinct, no longer immediate. And for the first time since this started, The pressure in my chest eased just slightly. We passed through the light and continued straight, the city opening around us, and I let out a breath I had been holding for what felt like hours. He did not look back, did not signal, did not confirm anything, but he did not need to. The message was clear in everything he had done. He had not just seen the danger, he had reshaped it, controlled it, reduced it until it no longer held the same power over me. And as I followed him through the quiet glow of the city, one thought settled firmly in my mind. I had spent my entire life moving through the world unnoticed, but tonight, someone had not only seen me, he had refused to let anything else take that place. We drove for what felt like a long time after that, not because the distance was far, but because something inside me had not caught up yet, something still trying to understand how a normal night had turned into something I could not walk away from. The city grew quieter again as he led me off the main avenue and into a neighborhood I did not recognize, the streets wider, cleaner, the lights steadier. Like this part of the city operated under different rules. His car slowed as we approached a gated entrance, the kind you only see in places that do not expect trouble because they control who gets close enough to cause it. The gate opened without him stopping, smooth and automatic, and I hesitated for half a second before following, the decision feeling bigger than it should have, like crossing a line I could not see. Inside, everything changed, the noise of the city fading into something distant, replaced by quiet, controlled stillness. He pulled into a circular drive in front of a building that looked less like a home and more like something designed to remain untouched. Clean lines, soft lighting, nothing out of place. I parked a few feet behind him, my engine idling for a second longer before I turned it off, the silence settling around me again. But this time it did not feel empty, it felt contained. He stepped out first, closing his door with the same quiet precision, and walked toward me without rushing, like he knew I would not leave, like he knew I had already made that decision. I opened my door. Slowly, stepping out into the still air, my senses sharper now, aware of everything in a way I had not been before. The subtle hum of security lights, the faint movement somewhere beyond the building, the feeling of being watched but not in the same way as before. This was different, controlled, intentional, not hidden. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice steady but softer than usual, and he stopped just a few steps away, his gaze meeting mine with that same calm certainty. "Somewhere you are not." "Predictable," he replied, and the answer settled into me in a way that made more sense than anything else he had said tonight. I glanced back toward the gate, toward the world I had just come from, and for a moment I felt the weight of it, the routine, the simplicity, the illusion of control I used to believe in. "And tomorrow?" I asked, because that was the question that mattered now, not just tonight, not just the next hour, but everything after. He watched me for a second longer, like he was measuring the shift in me, the difference between the person who had stepped into that parking lot and the one standing here now. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "you learn to see what you have been missing." And there was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty, just a direction I could not ignore. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders lowering slightly as something inside me settled, not completely, but enough to move forward. "And you," I said, meeting his gaze again, "you will be there." It was not really a question, and he did not treat it like one. "I already am," he answered. And in that moment, I understood something I had been circling all night. He had not stepped into my life by accident. He had been watching long enough to know exactly when to act, exactly when to intervene. I nodded once, small but certain, and turned toward the building, my steps slower but steady, aware of him just behind me, not close enough to crowd me, not distant enough to disappear. The door opened before we reached it, another silent detail I might have missed before, and as I stepped inside, leaving the night behind me, one thought stayed clear above everything else. He did not just see what no one else did. He saw me before I even knew I needed to be found.